You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I hope wherever you are in the world and whatever you might be doing, you are doing very well. You're about to listen to a conversation between myself and a bloke called Billy Tegethoff. Billy is in probably my favourite band that I discovered through 2017 called the Oxford Coma. They released an excellent album called Everything Out of Tune. Do check it out. We talk all about that, plus a heap of other things. Let's get to the chat. Here's Billy.
Out of tune some time ago, and look, I did feel compelled to reach out to David to organise a chat. It's a massive sounding album that reminds me of where Soundgarden may have ended up if the grunge revolution didn't happen in 1991, courtesy of Nirvana. And your music also sounds like it's got a bit of Tool through it as well. So, mate, for many people listening, because I do host a radio show and podcast series, this will be their introduction to the Oxford Coma. So, could you go on to describe the album and indeed the band's music?
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, so the band itself has been around for, 5 or 6 years. And a couple of years ago, we were planning on disbanding, and I was planning on starting something new. And I had a concept and a new band name and all that, and the concept was to try to capture with instruments something like what psychedelic auditory hallucinations sound like. Mm-hmm. And so that was the original objective, and that was kind of the mindset I started writing with. And granted, this is going off memories of drug experiences from when I was in high school, so I was, working with not a lot to go on, but that was kind of the idea. And eventually, just sort of wound up, instead of going with another band, restaffed the Oxford Coma. Our original drummer came back to help me write some of this stuff, and then we got a new bassist. And eventually a second guitarist. So we took our time with this. The idea was to do the best album that we possibly could with what we had to work with. So this went from, I think, about 20 songs down to the 9 that made it on the album. It took about 2 years to write everything. And then the plan from the get-go was to record it with Steve Albini. So I had been in communication with him and his studio manager from the time we started writing. And then finally got in there in April and did it. So as far as what the music is now, I mean, we kind of lost sight of the original objective, but I think a kernel of it still is in there, particularly with Doug, our bassist, playing. Yep. He's the one making all the weird noises. Uh-huh. So I don't know. Past the point, we just kind of gave up on trying to really control the direction it was taking. We were jamming, and things that we were liking, we just kept going with. So yeah. Not sure how to describe it beyond that. It's just where we wound up.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, mate. And look, anybody listening out there, that's as much of a descriptor that you need to get actually from the original creator. So I did read something both a little funny and also a little confrontational that Steve Albini shared, so I'm glad you brought him up so early. It was about his experience riding in an airport shuttle in Barcelona with Tyler, the Creator, and Odd Future. Now, really, if you read any of Tyler's or Odd Future's lyrics, it actually seemed like it was life imitating art, Steve's experience. And it was around the same time that it was reported that Tyler was banned from entering New Zealand, and there was also a campaign run here in Australia by an activist organisation called Collective Shout that was collecting signatures to take to the immigration minister asking for him to cancel Tyler's visa to Australia. So my point after that very long statement, mate, is that Steve doesn't sound like he's afraid to shoot straight from the sound of things. So what was your experience like working with him?
I'd heard that. I'd heard that he could be quite intimidating. That wasn't my experience at all. He was pretty laid back. I mean, he's a total nerd. Like, you could tell he's doing recording because that's what he loves doing, and watching him work. I mean, the guy's like a surgeon with a tape machine. So yeah, I mean, the whole thing was pretty laid back. Granted, he did. He thanked me for coming in as prepared as we did. Apparently, most bands don't do a lot of the legwork ahead of time and kind of mess around and waste a lot of time while we were there. I mean, we had a limited budget and a limited amount of time, so we wanted to do as much pre-production as possible. But we knew what we wanted. His whole objective was to give it to us. So he was the one thing that I'd heard about him that rang true was that he doesn't give feedback unless it's technical feedback. Like asking, there was a guitar squeal on that part. Was that intentional? That was about the extent of the feedback he'd give on a take. Or, oh yeah, it sounded like it was on tempo. But he made a point to not inject his opinion of the aesthetics of anything we were doing, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, agreed. And I can't tell you, mate, how many producers or engineers that I've spoken to have told me that even some well-known bands that I'm not going to mention, mate, they turn up to a studio and they don't have their shit together. I'm not sure that I understand that because I'm a musician myself, because it's not like the producer's going to act like George Martin for the Beatles and just sort of you dump everything on him and then he makes sense of everything. It's not really how it works for 99.9 repeater % of producers that are out there. So it's, when you're working with a guy like Steve, is it, and look, I'm not a Nirvana fan, by the way, so I'm not coming at it from the perspective that I'm a fanboy, but is it tempting to start asking him questions about some of the artists he's worked with? Like, were you tempted to ask him about what it was like working on In Utero?
Kind of, although it felt like it would be weird to do it, so I didn't. Although he did indulge like every question that we wanted to ask him. Mostly we asked him about Neurosis, and he was totally cool with talking about what it was like working with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Nirvana fan, to be honest with you. So, it's but I mean, the only question I'd like to ask him was, did he think it was odd that they want to follow up one of the most successful and commercially appealing albums of all time with an album that is at times virtually unlistenable and with a relatively unknown producer? But I digress. That would have been a good question.
He probably would have answered it too.
So, mate, about you guys again. Your album was available to stream via Decibel magazine recently. Now, I think that's one of the most widely available, widely available print and online extreme music publications around in 2017, soon to be 2018. Did you get much of a kick from that campaign? Like, did it work out well for you?
No. I mean, yeah, we saw a little bump in streams, but based on the staff picks for Decibel's top albums of 2017, and I guess the artists that were getting the most accolades from them, I don't know that we were really something that was all that appealing to their readership.
Yep.
And there's a big thing going with Doom. There's a big thing going with death metal, and we are neither of those, to be sure.
Yeah, look, I don't know much about Decibel, I've got to say, I wouldn't say that I thought it was an unusual pairing, but I was looking forward to asking you that question, and I thought your response would be as the one that you've given to me, because I think you get a lot of run-of-the-mill metal fans that might be reading that magazine who might not really be able to interpret what you're trying to achieve with your music.
I mean, I don't really know. I can't speak for their readership. I mean, I'm friends with most of my friends are metal fans, and a few of them play in bands that did make Decibel's, top 10 or whatever it was albums. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I know for a fact that they appeal to a pretty specific audience that already exists because they sound similar to a few other bands that are currently I guess
in vogue for 2017.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so look, I thought I don't know whether they did this, but I don't think they did, but I couldn't see that they included the video of Cartoons, which I think is an excellent album cut, and it's actually the album cut that could probably live a life of its own outside of the album, because there's a lot going on through that video, and I do love the concept. But, mate, for the people listening, can you explain the theme or the concept behind the video to the album track Cartoons?
Yeah, sure. That's actually probably the closest to a concept we've started with for a video ever. We were trying to do sort of an homage to Silence of the Lambs and the whole Buffalo Bill scene, and I mean we had to morph it because that's not really what the content of the song is about, but it sort of turned into like somewhere between that and American Horror Story, or I don't know. We had the PR company that we were working with really wanted us to get a video out as part of the release campaign, and they wanted to do it on I want to say they wanted it on Wednesday, and they told me that they would really like to put it out on Wednesday on, I think, the previous Friday. So we actually wound up shooting the whole thing in about 4 hours, and then I edited the whole thing in the 3 days following.
Jesus.
So
Okay.
there wasn't a lot of time to really think about it. It was just kind of, all right, can I watch this and look at it, and is it tolerable? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Send it off.
Jeez, okay. Yeah, was that Earsplit PR, is it, that you were working with the promotions company?
What's that?
Is that Earsplit PR? That's how I found out about you guys, was through the promotions that they sent through, the blasts that they sent through.
No. I wish we'd been working with Earsplit to begin with. No, we were working with a bigger company that works with typically bigger bands and bigger festivals, and even a few television networks. And they'd done some radio stuff for us in the past, and I thought they did a bang up job with the radio stuff. But the press stuff we got, and I guess this is nothing against them. We're just probably not the right clientele, but we got more or less the exact same type of coverage that we got with Earsplit for 20 times the money.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a big bloody lesson in that, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah. Which unfortunately I had to learn the hard way, but that was part of the plan from the beginning too, was to use them, because I figured, if Earsplit did this good of a job for this much, then they're going to do, this much more of a job for that much. Didn't turn out that way. Of course, wound up, bailing out of that campaign early because it was completely unreasonable to stay in it. And then, came back to Dave.
Yeah, no, fair enough, mate. And look, you do have to try these things because you are an independent artist, and you just mentioned, something that you have to do when you're an independent artist, which is that whole do-it-yourself thing. I mean, you mentioned on the Wednesday prior to is it the Friday, did you say? You had to get a bloody video sorted. I mean, that's, for people listening, that's what you need to do if you're trying to get your music out there, don't you? You have to meet deadlines that seem impossible, but you've just got to do it in order to reach and achieve broad coverage to an audience that you might not ordinarily have access to.
Right. Yeah, they had managed to get Metal Injection to agree to premiere a video that didn't exist yet. So
yeah.
We had to get one to exist.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's, what about, because I had prepared a question, but I think you've kind of already answered it, mate, but I'll ask the question anyway. It was, the internet provides a lot of opportunity, but it provides its equal opportunity, really, isn't it? Which means everybody's out there trying to promote their music. So how do you cut through all the bullshit and let your music be heard? You've just mentioned that you worked with one PR company that wasn't probably as an appropriate fit for you as, say, somebody that had cost you 20 times less, the one that I heard about you through. So is it a case of just working with people who you feel your gut instinct tells you know how to promote your music to an appropriate audience?
Yeah, and I think there's an element of working with people who at least conceptually appreciate what you're doing. I know the ear split people are I mean, they don't. I don't get the impression that they make a ton of money doing what they're doing. They do it because I think they find it to be meaningful work, and they do a hell of a job. So I don't know if I ever figure out how to cut through all the noise and get our music heard. I'll be sure to let you know. But that's a nut I haven't quite cracked yet.
Well, maybe the Oxford Coma could do the U2 thing, that bloody that egomaniacal thing that U2 did a couple of years ago with that awful album they released. I think it was in 2013 or 14, where it downloaded to everybody's iPhone and everybody's iOS device. Maybe you could do some sort of a guerrilla campaign like that, mate. So on every man, woman, and child throughout the bloody globe on their iOS device, the latest Oxford Coma release appears. Imagine that.
Yeah, I gotta admit, I heard a story about the net neutrality rules being repealed, and the I guess the FCC or somebody was going through all these online comments that were for the most part against it, and they were claiming that something like I don't know, 2 out of 5 of them were fake and were written by bots, and it got me thinking.
Yeah, mate, just go and get the Russian bots that apparently influenced the election over there, mate, a year ago. With the election of the Donald, mate, go and get some of those bots to work on your behalf. So, and that leads very nicely into my next question. So, I have read commentary online that I think you said it, or maybe a journo somewhere said it, but your music is as influenced by the current social climate in the USA as it is by music itself. So, mate, what's your take on the Donald's America a year after, or a year and a bit after he won the election?
Oh, it's a fucking embarrassment.
Mm.
I obviously don't care for the man much, at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It has felt like a much more hostile country to live in for the last, I don't know, year and a half or so, ever since he started gaining traction.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's just my perception of things or if that's a legitimate observation, but that's certainly what it feels like.
What do you think his elevation to POTUS represents? Is it a reaction to? And I'm asking this as a question, by the way. This isn't my personally held view, and I've asked a few artists of this that have been brave enough to. I've been brave enough to ask, and they've been brave enough to respond. So please don't respond if you don't want to. But mate, is it a reaction to things like identity politics? Because that's the feedback I'm getting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It's kind of like the one group that gets left out of identity politics, to be sure, is, straight white men. And I think if you look at the bulk of his supporters, you get Christian, straight, white men, mostly working class, which is somewhat ironic given the legislation that they just passed. But yeah, I don't know. I think that this, to some extent, this is a backlash against that. It's like, well, what the hell makes XYZ group so special? Like, we're people too. We didn't choose this. And I don't really know. I have read, I don't know exactly how many books, but I read a handful of books that are, studies of right-wing politics and just the history of the Republican Party and the rise of Donald Trump, trying to wrap my head around how people can get behind this sort of thing, and I have not managed to make sense of it for myself yet.
I think a lot of people in Australia just look at it from the perspective that they weren't that crash-eyed candidates, either one of the two of them, so Hillary or the Donald, right? So it was, and it was very partisan. So it was very much like you're either for the person or you're against the person, kind of like the way people follow football teams. So it's sort of the actual content in policy was disregarded for whether or not you followed the individual. And I think I don't know whether this can be confirmed, mate. You might know, or somebody out there in the world of the Wild Wild West might want to inform me on this. But I think there's a very low voter turnout this time around compared to in years gone by. So people were disengaged. The people that were engaged were the people that tended to look at politics like a sport. You know what I mean? So I don't think that there was as much engagement as in years gone by. So people weren't as aware of what voting for Donald, or even the people that voted for Hillary, what voting for them actually would lead to. And I think that my point there would also be that, mate, I don't think, and I've already made it, but I'll underline it again. I don't think you had either candidate wasn't really somebody that you could aspire to want to be. And I think, as someone who is an American, as someone who stands on the sidelines watching this stuff, I mean, you know, we are so heavily impacted by American foreign policy in Australia. Like, you guys go to war, we have to follow you. It's just as simple as that. So that's certainly the line that either side of politics here in Australia takes. And economically, the way things are going with China and to a lesser extent, I think North Korea, I mean, God knows, that's a whole other subject by itself. But, you know, more talking about the economics of it. You know, we're so heavily impacted by the decisions that are made in America. And it was not funny, but it was interesting to see that our Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, he and the President of Mexico, they were the two guys that Trump blasted in his first week in office. He really had a go at our guy and the Mexican guy as well. So it was interesting to see that. And there are a lot of very nervous people here in Australia about what the Trump election to president, or the elevation of Trump's elevation to presidency, God, I'll get it right, Trump's elevation to presidency would mean for Australia. So it was the first time that I saw a lot of average people, sort of like mums and dads and working people, to take an interest of what was going on in US politics.
It's very loud. It's very hard to ignore. So, yeah, that's understandable.
Well, let's take a right turn and let's talk about your wonderful music again, but more specifically, my show is called Scars and Guitars, so I do like to talk about the technical side of things. Now, mate, according to the Orange Amps website, you're an endorsed artist. Is that still the case?
That is still the case. They just loaned us a backline to do a little run up the West Coast.
Wonderful. Okay, so you're still using the PPC 412 cab and the Thunderbird 50 head?
Yep.
Awesome. What is it about that combination that works for you?
That's a good question. I didn't find it by doing any particular research. I had a friend who was selling one, and this was prior to becoming an Orange endorsed artist, and he was selling it for a really good deal. So I wound up buying it from him, and it was a good deal because I've had that amp for years now, and I still haven't found anything that performs as well as consistently. I mean, we've used some other amps to get some different tones. We also used a Marshall 1959 head on the record, but that amp that Marshall is like a very specific sound. It's this very nasty, fuzzy, like treble to the point where it hurts. That's kind of where that came in.
Yeah, okay.
And then the Orange, I mean, it's a much more balanced tone. It's got a lot more low end. So the combination of them, I think, made for a pretty good guitar tone.
And are you using like a Strat or an SG? Because it sounds like they'd be the two guitars that would probably work really well with that combo.
For almost the entire record, I was using I was using a Dunable. Are you familiar with those at all?
I'm not. Tell us all about it. Yeah, it's not a brand I've heard of, actually.
Okay. Have you heard of the band Intronaut?
Heard of them, but I've not heard the music.
Okay. They're pretty wild, like progressive, somewhere in the progressive, somewhere in the psychedelic metal realm. I saw them open for Tool a few years back, and then I was shopping around for a guitar, and a friend of mine had bought one from this company called Dunable, and posted something about it on Facebook, so I went and looked at their website, and I thought the guitars were awesome, so I wound up ordering one from this guy, and when the PayPal statement came back to me, it said that the charge was from Intronaut. And I thought that's awfully strange.
Ah, right. Yeah, okay.
So anyway, turns out that the main creative force behind Intronaut is this guy named Sasha Dunable, who also happens to be a kick-ass luthier. So I wound up becoming friends with this guy over the course of a few years. I mean, my what I do for a day job is web development and marketing, so I wound up redoing his whole site for him and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I used one of his guitars for the majority of the record because I think they're better than Fender or Gibson or just about anything else out there. Mm-hmm. So that was the shape of the thing is modeled after an old Gibson RD, pretty thick strings, 12 gauge, bare knuckle pickups. And then the other thing that I used was an electrical guitar company, Series 2. And if you're not familiar with those are the aluminum necked guitars.
Uh-huh, okay, gotcha. And that's because you want that real trebly, MIDI to high sound.
Well, that you'd think you get that with some aluminum guitars, like if you listen to Steve's band Shellac, he uses probably the nastiest sounding aluminum guitar that has ever been produced. Travis Bean TB 500.
That's what that is. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So, and he manages to make it work, but that's a very hard guitar to control. The electrical guitar company ones, you can actually get a super wide range of tones out of the thing. I never would have thought I'd become like an advocate for aluminum necks. It just never occurred to me a few years ago, but now I've got a couple of them and I love them.
It makes sense also from the perspective that as a touring musician, a working musician, when you're on the road a lot, bloody guitars and basses, as I mentioned, I'm also a musician, mate, especially on basses, their necks move around so much. You know, in the heat lean left in a van and then you take them out, then you've got to the first set, sometimes I play covers band, so I'm playing 4 sets a night or what have you. If it's a bad day, because right now it's probably about 40 degrees where I'm at, 40 degrees Celsius that is, so what's that, about 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, you can imagine what that's like when you go from driving in the car, moving your stuff, then you go into an air-conditioned environment. The necks themselves don't know what's going on. That's a typical wooden neck. So aluminium's also got that other property where it doesn't move around so much. Is that what you find?
Yeah, I mean it does expand and contract a little bit, but the only factor is temperature. You don't have to worry about humidity or anything like that. I know I live in Arizona, which is, I mean, it's a desert, so no humidity. But if I take a wood neck guitar just over to California for a show, I gotta make a truss rod adjustment before I play because the neck has started to give a little.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's related or not, but I play Music Man basses. And the truss rod snapped inside of it, so it didn't snap down the bottom near the nut. It snapped halfway along. They were pretty good about it actually. They're tooling up a neck and sending me out mine out here before I've got to send mine back to theirs because, of course, they've got proprietary products. They don't let you hang on to broken things, in other words. But yeah, I've got to think it must have been to do with the weather, because I am a working musician. I'm on the road quite a bit, meaning I'm in my car a lot, travelling from gig to gig around southeast Queensland here in northern New South Wales. I've got to think it's just 17 or 18 years down the track, mate. That might have been a key influence in the break, So I've spoken to a lot of musicians about this, working musicians, I mean, and yeah, it seems to be one of those things that you're constantly having to stay on top of, and especially with your Thunderverb 50 head, mate, you must have to travel around with a stack of 12 AX7 valves.
Surprisingly, not so much. I don't know. I've gotten lucky, or that's just a super sturdy head. I have yet to have to change tubes on the road ever.
That really surprises me. Yeah, no, that's one of the reasons that I stayed away from valve amplification. Even a valve preamp was just, things getting dropped and things being put on top of things and driving in cars and with stiff suspension or what have you, and just that knockabout thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously Orange are making fairly good stuff, although, mate, just between you and I, and God, of course, people listening to this, Orange doesn't have that great a reputation here in Australia. I don't know whether it's because I don't know whether it's because of the importer, mate. We don't ever have direct from supplier here. We're just a branch arm of someone has a supply relationship with somebody here, and everything costs basically triple or double what it costs overseas. And apparently the support on the products when things go wrong isn't that great, so consequently you don't see a great deal of it. I've got to tell you, mate, in my time travelling as a musician, I've probably, out of the hundreds of musicians that I've met, I've probably only met 2 or 3 people that use Orange. Involuntarily, I'm not talking about endorsed artists, because there are no endorsed artists in the covers world. There are people that like to use gear, and that's it, you know what I mean? I always love it when I go to these cover bands' websites, and they have like the brand in the corner. You'll know what I'm talking about, being an internet marketer and building websites for people. They co-opt the brand and like try to make out like they're endorsed by the brand, as opposed to they just use the brand. You know what I mean? So it's like the band endorses this product as opposed to the brand endorses this band. Anyway, I digress. I just thought that was funny, but yeah, no, it's always been a bit of an interesting thing that I don't see Orange that much out on the road here. I know there are some fairly big bands that use them, originals bands that use them, but mate, I just haven't seen many, or really any. Certainly not in the last few years.
I think it's much more prevalent in the States because I see them all over the place. But then again, I know they're more expensive here than they are in the UK, but not to the extent that you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm only, God, if the supplier's listening to this, I'm not having a go at you. I'm just talking about the feedback that I've received when I've asked people about what their experience is like. And I looked at the 200B about 15 years ago, the bass amplifier they had, the sole bass amplifier they had back in the day. I know they've got a few more out nowadays, but it played beautifully. It was very creamy. If you wanted that sort of Paul McCartney style sound with a bit of a growl through it, that was the one to go for. But mate, there was no way I was going to be travelling around with that bloody thing bashing up against walls when I'm walking up and down stairways, firewells and all that sort of stuff. So I used Gallien Kruger, and I switched from Fender or Sun, but Sun was rebranded. Fender took ownership of the brand name Sun, and so I was really Fender. You weren't playing Sun, you're really playing Fender, and that was a heap of shit. That was terrible. That blew up on me on stage, that.
Great.
I've never had a fireworks. That's the only time I've ever had almost a fireworks display on stage. So I just junked it. I just gave it away to somebody who thought that they could fix it for $50, and that amp Australian was about $2,500 or $3,000, which is about, I don't know, $4,500 or $5,000 for you guys. It wasn't cheap, and I probably only got 40 or 50 uses out of it, which is bugger all for a working musician. So I've had Gallien Kruger since 2009, and I haven't looked back. Just
right on.
So, mate, that's really all the questions that I had. How do people get in touch with you to link with you guys and find out more about your music?
They can visit our website, theoxfordcoma.com. If they want to stream and or download the music, we have it all up on theoxfordcoma.bandcamp.com. All the social media stuff is either /theoxfordcoma or @theoxfordcoma. And we have vinyl for sale. You can get that. There's a link to it from the website. It's also up on the oxfordcoma.bigcartel.com. I think that's all of them. Yeah, that's all of them.
I'm going to do my bit for you here in Australia. It'd be awesome to see you guys come down. I know it's hard to come down here, mate. You know, we just had a promoter go out of business because of some alleged sexual assault bullshit. So when I say bullshit, I'm not talking about the allegations. They're apparently quite real. It's unbelievable that people carry on like that in 2017. It was a guy that I'd had a recent interaction with too. So Walls of the Throne Room, Sleep, and a couple of other bands that pulled out of their Australian tours for 2018 because of it. So yeah, it's Walls in the Throne Room in particular. I was really looking forward to watching. I love that nouveau black metal stuff. You know, the stuff that when they're not really wearing corpse paint and they're more talking about universal subjects such as nature, than devils and demons and Dungeons and Dragons, which is nothing wrong with that. It's just not my thing. But yeah, I mean, I was talking to Brandon Seabrook about this. I'd love to bring him down. You know, the jazz guitarist from New York.
Never heard of him.
Check his music out, man. It's out there, but he's a jazz guitarist, so you're a musician, I'm a musician. You can hear what's going on, it's actually technically correct in there, but it sounds utterly confusing for the first 15 seconds. It actually takes you 15 seconds or so to actually register what's actually happening, which is a very unique experience for me because I consider myself not schooled. I'm not someone who can read music per se, but I've got a pretty acute ear to listening to music and finding what's melodic. It took me a while with his music, but that's what I loved about it. Was it sort of drew me in and made me really force me to listen to it, and consequently I have been listening to it rather a lot since. But your music's a lot like that too, mate. I've got to give you that compliment. You know, it's sort of initially it's quite confrontational, but once you pay attention to what's going on, particularly in the track Cartoon, you realise there's a lot actually happening in there that's worth paying attention to.
Well, thank you. It's a solid observation about that. With any luck, we can get more people engaged to the point where they'll listen to it a few times.
Well, I
think it kind of needs that.
Yeah, well, look, I'll be doing my bit down here, mate. I didn't get to say, I was about to say, but I went off on a tangent. I've got, as I said, a radio. I've got my radio show, and I've also got my podcast series. But you know, with my podcast series, mate, it's unusual. Well, it's not unusual. I understand why it happens because most of the artists that I do interview are from Europe and from North America. 90% are. The majority of my audience is actually in North America. So hopefully it gets a bit of a pop there for you. Yeah, there's 22 million of us down here, and there's bugger all, you know, people that get into experimental and extreme music in Australia. There's probably about 80 people in Brisbane that do, where I'm from. So I'm sure they listen in, and on the radio show I know that a lot of people listen in because they give me feedback, but the podcast, yeah, that tends to go global, which I think is rather nice. So people all over the world will be able to find out about your music if they tune in.
Awesome. Well, I definitely agree.
You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and that was my conversation with the bloke called Billy Tegethoff, who was in a band called the Oxford Coma. Thank you so much for listening.